I heard my mother's voice before I saw the camera light. "She's just a maid in her own home," she laughed, not knowing the mic was live. By morning, the clip had millions of views, and my name was the trending hashtag I never asked for. Strangers debated my worth like a sport. Friends texted me screenshots I couldn't bring myself to open. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the comment buried under the noise. "She doesn't know the real reason her scholarship disappeared." If you've ever learned the truth from a stranger, you know the drop before the fall. My brother's college acceptance letter was framed in the hallway, angled so that sunlight spilled over the embossed crest every morning. Mine was pinned with a thumbtack above the laundry hamper in my room, its corners curling under the damp. Connor's scholarship was celebrated with a dinner at the nicest steakhouse in town. Mine came with a quiet, "That's good," from my mother as she washed dishes. When he left for a semester abroad in Spain, the local paper ran a feature with his photo in a blazer. The only time my name appeared in print was in the "Help Wanted" ad for the used bookstore where I worked 25 hours a week. At the dinner table, conversations felt like leaderboards. Achievements were recited in descending order of perceived value, and I was always last. Connor's startup pitch had potential. His networking trip to New York was visionary. My midterm grades, 3 A's and a B, were fine. The pecking order never changed, and neither did the tone, a casual hierarchy built into the rhythm of our meals. On rainy days, I found my refuge behind the counter at the bookstore. The front window fogged over, the scent of old paper and cinnamon tea steeping from the cafe next door. I'd sit cross-legged on the stool with a worn copy of Jane Eyre, letting the sound of rain hitting the glass replace whatever was buzzing in my head. For a little while, I didn't have to defend myself or prove my worth. I could just exist among stories that didn't know me. One Tuesday, the bell over the door chimed, and a man in a wool coat stepped inside, shaking water from his hat. He bought a hardback biography of some tech mogul, and as I slid it into a bag, his eyes lingered on me. "You're Marlene's daughter, aren't you?" he asked. "She used to—" He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw tightening. I waited, but he only offered a thin smile and left, the bell ringing behind him. That night, curiosity prickled like a rash I couldn't ignore. In the attic, I dug through the fireproof box where my mother kept important papers. Among tax returns and birth certificates, I found a file labeled Education Fund, Grandfather. The balance column stopped 3 years ago, replaced by a ledger of investments, stock purchases, capital injections into a private tech firm I recognized from Connor's LinkedIn profile. The fund was empty now, its last transfer noted as Equity Stake, Series A. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the paper trembling in my hands. That money had been promised to both of us. I'd counted on it to cover the gap between my scholarship and tuition. Instead, it had been funneled into Connor's future. I tried to tell myself there was an explanation, that maybe my share was somewhere else. But the pages told a cleaner story. My education had been collateral for his ambitions. Later that week, while shelving new arrivals at the store, I overheard 2 regulars chatting about family favoritism. "Some people don't even realize they're repeating what was done to them," one said. The words lodged in my mind like a splinter. That evening I confronted my grandmother's old photo albums. There was my mother, 12 years old, standing in the shadow while her 2 brothers held trophies. There she was again, unmentioned in captions about the pride of the family. The pattern was older than me, older than Connor. I wanted to believe that understanding her past would make mine easier to bear. But if she had lived through the sting of being sidelined, why would she let it happen again? Worse, Why would she be the one orchestrating it? Closing the albums, I felt the attic walls shrink around me. That was when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "If you want proof, meet me in the basement library at 9 p.m. No name, no details. Just the kind of message that could be a prank. Or the start of something I couldn't walk away from. I stared at it for a long minute, the rain from earlier still dripping in my memory. For once, I didn't rush to delete or ignore. Instead, I saved the number and whispered into the quiet attic. "I'll be there." The library basement smelled like damp carpet and printer toner. At exactly 9, a figure in a navy hoodie slid into the chair across from me. He didn't introduce himself, just pushed a flash drive across the table. "Everything you need to understand," he whispered, before vanishing into the stacks. 2 nights later, I was in the computer lab at the bookstore, installing the drive. Inside was a folder titled Contracts. Buried among legal PDFs and scanned signatures was a clause that froze my hands on the mouse. My mother had signed an agreement with investors in Connor's startup, granting them her stake in exchange for a funding round, all on the condition that I pursue no overlapping or competitive interests in related industries. My education fund had been bartered away as a safeguard for my brother's future. But I didn't stop to cry. Instead, I doubled down. That semester, my data science professor announced a collaborative project, building an AI model to optimize lesson plans for underserved schools. I volunteered before he'd even finished speaking. The plan was simple. Throw myself into work so impressive that no one, not my mother, not Connor, could ignore it. By day, I was hunched over code and research papers in the lab. By night, I filmed short vlogs from the back corner of the bookstore, speaking into my phone as though I were telling a secret. Sometimes the hardest people to convince aren't strangers, I'd say. Uploading with no hashtags, no tags. Just the quiet hope that someone specific might be watching. I didn't know if my mother saw them, but the view counts crept upward in silent increments. One Saturday, a little boy wandered into the store while his mom browsed the clearance bin. He pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand, a bookmark he'd drawn with crooked stars, and my name in blue crayon. "You helped me find the dragon book last week," he said, grinning. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from a place untouched by politics or betrayal. For a moment, the war receded. The email from the International Student Technology Conference came a week later. My abstract had been accepted. They wanted me to present in Berlin. The high was dizzying, like stepping into sunlight after months underground. But then I read the last line. "Please submit a letter of recommendation from your legal guardian or designated academic sponsor." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My legal guardian was my mother. I didn't need to imagine her response. I could hear it. "This isn't the right time. Think of your brother's needs. What if you embarrass yourself?" The fight inside me, however, had already shifted. This wasn't about permission anymore. It was about access. Without that letter, I couldn't claim the spot. Without the spot, the work I'd done would vanish into the ether. Meanwhile, the internet had found me. My vlogs, once quiet, were being shared by a handful of education advocates and AI researchers. For every message of encouragement, there was another calling me ungrateful, accusing me of humiliating my family for views. The noise was constant, my sleep frayed at the edges. Coffee became the first and last taste of my day. One night, I returned to the flash drive, scanning every page of the contract again, looking for a loophole. That's when I saw it. A single handwritten note in the margin of the final page, in my mother's looping cursive. "Don't let her outshine Connor." I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my lungs like a punctured balloon. The phrasing wasn't legalese, it was personal. This wasn't just about protecting an investment. It was about keeping me small enough to manage, quiet enough to forget. The screensaver flickered to life, and for a moment I saw my reflection in the dark glass, tired, thinner than I remembered, but still here. The war wasn't loud yet, but it was already underway. And if she wanted me invisible, she should have picked a daughter who didn't know how to code her way into the light. I first met Alex at a campus panel on breaking cycles. He was sharp-featured, mid-30s, with the kind of calm that feels earned. When I learned he'd been cut off by his own family, at 19 for refusing to take over the family business, I understood why his TEDx talk had over 1 million views. After the panel, I waited until the line of students thinned before approaching. "I think I'm living a smaller version of your story," I told him. He studied me for a moment, then said, "Then maybe it's time to tell it out loud." 2 weeks later, an email arrived from a TEDx organizer in my city. "We'd love for you to speak at our event. Theme: Hidden Inequality at Home." I read it twice before the meaning sank in. This wasn't Berlin. This wasn't research code. It was my life on stage. Preparation was easy when it was just words on a Google Doc, bullet points about favoritism, invisible ceilings, the economics of affection. But the morning of the event, I stood in front of my open closet and froze. Everything looked too casual or too stiff. I wanted to look like someone worth listening to, but not someone pretending to be older than she was. My fingers hovered over a navy dress I'd bought secondhand and never worn. I pulled it out, smoothed the fabric, and told myself that if it fit, it was meant to be. As I zipped it up, my phone buzzed. The subject line read, "Inquiry, regarding your TEDx talk." It was from a local journalist whose work I respected. But the first sentence hollowed me out. "A reliable source claims your mother is contacting the organizers to request your removal from the program." The email continued with an offer to discuss, but I couldn't read past that line. The air in my apartment felt thinner, like I'd climbed too fast. I sat on the bed, dress pooling around me, trying to picture the phone calls, the justifications she might use. It's for her own good. She's not ready. She'll embarrass herself. Every imagined phrase came in her voice, polished and certain. That week, I signed the lease on a 10 by 12 room above a laundromat. It smelled faintly of detergent and had a single window overlooking the alley, but it was mine. I pushed my desk against the wall, taped a blackout cloth over the glass to cut street noise, and set up a camera tripod. This was where I would write, speak, and exist without surveillance. One night, scrolling through my mentions after posting a new video, I noticed a pattern. A small TikTok account had been defending me against every troll, replying with timestamps from my talks, links to my work, and the kind of sharp comebacks I never dared to post. The username was a string of random numbers, the profile photo, a stock image of a bookshelf. I ignored it until one of their comments read, "She's been working twice as hard for half the credit. Ask me how I know." That made me click the profile. Only 3 videos, all slideshows of my research work, set to indie music Connor used to play when we were kids. The realization hit like a chord I hadn't heard in years. I called him that night. "Is this you?" A pause. "You weren't supposed to know." "Why are you doing it?" "Because I'm starting to think maybe Mom's been wrong about a lot of things." His voice was careful, like a bridge not yet tested. I didn't know whether to be grateful or suspicious, but it lodged in me like a warm ember. The following Friday, a producer from the local news station emailed me. They wanted to do a feature on young innovators, highlighting my AI education project alongside my TEDx talk. It felt like oxygen after months underwater. Until I read the legal release form. Because I was still 20, they needed a parent or legal guardian's signature to air the segment, and my legal guardian was still my mother. I stared at the form, pen in hand, the ink refusing to flow. It was the cruelest loop. Every door I opened still had to be unlocked by the person who had spent years keeping me inside. The studio lights were hot enough to dry my throat. I'd been through makeup, mic check, the polite handshake with the anchor whose teeth looked sharpened for sound bites. This was supposed to be a feature on young innovators, but I knew my family drama was the undertow no one could ignore. I'd practiced answers in the mirror, aiming for calm precision, but the moment the cameras rolled, I spotted her. My mother, off stage. Headset dangling around her neck like she'd been part of the crew all along. The first 2 questions were safe. My AI project, my interest in equitable education. Then the anchor glanced off camera, nodding toward her. She stepped into frame, smiling as if this had been planned. "I'm her mother," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I think I can help explain—" I moved my chair an inch, enough to break her touch. "I'm here to talk about my own work," I said, looking straight into the lens. "My own story." The room shifted. I could feel the camera operators lean forward, the producers behind the glass exchanging glances. My mother's smile thinned, her voice dropping into that tone she used when she thought no one else could hear. "Emma, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I replied, my voice steady but low enough to make people lean in. What I didn't know then was that the anchor's earpiece was buzzing with a last-minute decision. Just before we'd gone live, a producer had received an email from an anonymous account, subject line, "For the segment, truth in her own words." Attached was an audio file. The anchor hadn't planned to use it, but watching my mother try to take over had tipped the scale. "Actually," the anchor said, "we have something we'd like to play." The sound quality was grainy, like it had been recorded from a distance, but the voice was unmistakable. "I'll make sure she stays quiet," my mother said on the recording. "Whatever it takes. She doesn't need to be out there making a fool of herself, or worse, making Connor look small." The silence in the studio was thick enough to feel on my skin. My mother's face didn't crumble. It hardened. "That's taken out of context," she said quickly. But the anchor was already moving to the next question, eyes on me. "Would you like to respond?" I looked into the lens again, but this time I imagined every young person who had sat at a dinner table feeling invisible. "This isn't about making anyone look small," I said. "It's about telling the truth when you've been told to stay quiet your whole life." The interview ended without a handshake. My mother left without looking at me. Outside, the air was cold enough to burn in my lungs, and for the first time in months, I let it fill me all the way. The backlash was immediate. My phone lit up like a slot machine. Texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Most of them variations on, "How could you do this to her?" The rest came from strangers, some thanking me, others calling me ungrateful. Connor's name trended briefly alongside mine, his profile photo replaced with a blank silhouette. By the weekend, I was no longer welcome at Sunday dinner. An aunt told me not to drag the family name when I visited the neighborhood. Even my godmother unfollowed me on Instagram. And yet, in the middle of it, a direct message arrived from the National Alliance Against Familial Favoritism, a group I hadn't even known existed. They wanted me to serve as their youth ambassador, to speak at schools, to help create resources for kids in situations like mine. I said yes before they could finish explaining. Still, the momentum didn't erase the ache. A few days later, I found myself at the train station, waiting for the 7:42 to the city for my first meeting with the Alliance. The platform was half empty, the sky bruised with early winter. I sat on a metal bench, earbuds in, and played the recording from the studio again. "I'll make sure she stays quiet, whatever it takes." The words should have gutted me, but instead they made me laugh, a short, sharp sound, because there I was, on my way to speak to a room full of people who wanted me loud. My laugh turned into tears, the kind you can't quite place on the chart between joy and grief. Commuters passed without looking twice. I wiped my face and checked the time. When the train pulled in, my phone buzzed. An email from my mother. "If you want to reconcile, remove the video from every platform. And don't speak at that conference. We can still fix this." I stared at the message until the doors started to close. Then I stepped onto the train, the email still open in my palm. The first time I walked into the community center's therapy room, I almost turned back. 6 metal chairs in a circle, a pot of lukewarm coffee in the corner, and a stack of tissues on a low table. It looked too plain to hold the kind of weight I'd been carrying. But then a woman across from me, maybe in her 40s, caught my eye and gave a small nod, like she already knew why I was there. We went around the circle. Stories spilled out. Siblings raised like royalty while others worked 2 jobs to stay afloat. Parents who wielded money like a leash. The quiet shame of never being the one. When it was my turn, my voice faltered on the first sentence, but steadied by the third. By the end, I felt like I'd cracked a window in a locked room. That night, I started drafting a book. Not a manifesto, not a memoir exactly. Something between a guide and a survival kit. I called it Invisible Daughters. I wrote in the same voice I used in my vlogs. Direct, unpolished, not pretending to have all the answers. Chapters on boundary setting, on financial independence, on finding validation outside bloodlines. I typed late into the night, pausing only when the memories pressed too hard against the back of my throat. 2 months in, I got a text from Connor. "Need to see you. Alone." We met at the little diner by the highway, the one with sticky menus and coffee that could strip paint. He slid into the booth, eyes darting like we were under surveillance. From his backpack, he pulled a worn leather-bound journal, its edges fraying. "I found this in the attic," he said. The handwriting was my mother's, but smaller, younger. The first entry was dated when she was 17. She wrote about how her father, the man I knew only as my distant grandfather, had told her she'd be leaving school to help with the family store so her brothers could focus on their futures. Page after page was filled with the grind of that life, the quiet anger, the promises she made to herself to escape. "She was you," Connor said softly. And somewhere along the way, she became him. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or gutted. My anger toward her had been clean, uncomplicated. This blurred it, made it harder to keep her in the box labeled villain. A week later, I drove out to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. The air was sharp with winter, the grass brittle under my boots. I stood at the modest stone for a long time, trying to picture the young version of my mother writing in that journal, her whole life narrowing under someone else's decision. For the first time, I felt something other than rage, a thin thread of pity that surprised me with its strength. When I got home, there was an email from the Global Education Summit. They wanted me as a keynote speaker. The topic? Overcoming hidden barriers to learning. It was nearly identical to the title of a speech my mother had once groomed Connor to give, before his business swallowed his calendar. I stared at the acceptance letter, my pulse thudding. The irony was almost cinematic. By spring, Invisible Daughters was finished. My agent, because somewhere along the way, I'd gotten one, sold it to a small press specializing in social issues. The advance wasn't huge, but I knew what I wanted to do with it. I founded the Second Chance Fund, offering micro-grants to students cut off from family support. It was bare bones at first. A website, an application form, a single bank account in my name. But word spread, and soon strangers began contributing. I kept the donor list private out of respect, though I scanned it occasionally, curious about who believed in the mission. One night, an alert popped up. A wire transfer large enough to fund 10 full grants. The donor's name was listed as anonymous, but the originating bank was the same one my mother used. I called Connor. "Do you think—" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, that's her." It was such an uncharacteristic gesture that I didn't know what to do with it. No note, no call. Just money sent quietly, as if she were repaying a debt she could never name out loud. The weeks leading up to the summit blurred in a rush of preparation. Slides, rehearsals, interviews. On the morning of my flight, my phone rang. Her number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear her voice. "Emma," she said, her tone stripped of its usual authority. "Can we talk before your speech? In person?" I didn't answer right away. The terminal announcements echoed over the line, boarding calls for flights to cities I didn't know. "Please," she added, "just meet me before you go on stage." I hung up without promising, the request looping in my mind. The backstage area of the Global Education Summit smelled faintly of stage lights and fresh paint. I had 15 minutes before my keynote when I saw her. My mother stood near the catering table, hands clasped in front of her, a little smaller than I remembered. For a moment, neither of us moved. She spoke first. "I'm not here to stop you." I waited, watching her search for words. "I read your book," she continued. "I didn't think I'd get past the first chapter, but I did. And I saw parts of myself I've tried to forget. I can't undo what I've done, Emma, but I can make sure it never happens again." It was the closest she had ever come to an apology. She didn't reach for excuses or the safety of half-truths. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "I want you to know, from now on, every cent, every account, every decision. I'll keep it transparent. You have my word." I leaned against the wall, the weight of years pressing and then lifting in uneven waves. We found a bench in the corner of the green room. For 5 minutes, we didn't speak. No lectures, no rebuttals. Just the muffled thud of footsteps on stage above us, the faint rhythm of our breathing, the sound of the audience filtering in, murmurs swelling like a tide. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle between us, not as a wall this time, but as something almost safe. When the stage manager called my name, I stood and took a breath. At the door, I turned to her. "Come with me," I said. She looked startled. "What?" "I want you to help me present the first Second Chance Scholarship. On stage." Her eyes widened, and for a second I saw the young girl from her journal, hopeful, uncertain. She nodded once. The lights hit us as we walked out together. I began my talk, the speech I'd rehearsed dozens of times, but this time I had her beside me. When I reached the final section, I turned toward her. "This fund was born out of my own story," I told the audience. "But it's also about breaking cycles before they break us. Today, I want to share this moment with the person who taught me, in ways both hard and hopeful, why this work matters." We handed the oversized scholarship check to a shy 19-year-old from the front row. The applause felt different. Less about me, More about the bridge we'd managed to build, fragile though it was. After the summit, life didn't return to normal. It became something new. My research in AI for educational access expanded into a multi-campus pilot program, matching lesson plans to student learning patterns in real time. I spoke at universities, high schools, even corporate conferences, not just about the tech, but about the invisible barriers so many students carry with them. The Second Chance Fund grew faster than I'd expected. Applications doubled in the second year. We built a mentorship network so recipients had more than just financial help. They had people to call when family wasn't safe to lean on. One evening, while sifting through the next round of applications, an email notification popped up. The sender was the same anonymous account that had texted me months ago. "If you want proof, meet me." The message this time was simple. "You don't know me, but I knew what was happening to you because it happened to me too." Attached was a short bio. The sender was a former student at my university, a scholarship recipient years back, who'd lost their funding when a parent decided to redirect it to a sibling. They'd been the one to slip me the flash drive with my mother's contract. And now, they were applying to graduate school, with a line in their application that read, "Funding source, Second Chance Scholarship, Class of 24. I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, the edges of the moment sharp with irony and grace. A week later, another email arrived. Subject line, "Your story saved me." The body was short. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Then I saw you on stage. Now I'm not afraid to tell the truth. I closed my laptop, the glow of the screen fading into the soft hum of my apartment. Outside, the city moved in its usual, indifferent rhythm. But somewhere in that rhythm I knew were the quieter beats. One person deciding to speak, another deciding to listen, and the space between them narrowing.